One key element when we start to move into graphical user interfaces is validating data coming in. The biggest issue is if we don't validate data, then we don't necessarily know how it's going to respond. Really, the best case scenario we can hope for is the user does some action we don't expect, and the application just stops, and unexplained. I mean, obviously, we can do better with some coding, but if we don't do any coding, then that's the best explanation. The worst is when the application starts doing unpredictable things. It corrupts data. It gives the false answer. The user thinks something useful happened and it didn't. Like, there's nothing more frustrating than I thought I paid my bill, but apparently I didn't. We want to have positive confirmation of either the action was successful or at least an indication the action wasn't. And so the key to doing that is being able to code and predict out the validation logic. If I don't do validation logic, my program might fail. I could, as I said, give bad results to the users. I can give the wrong results to the users, which again can be so much worse, and it's going to result in software that users don't want to use. If I'm trying to sell it, they won't buy it. If I'm trying to sell my business, they won't do business with me anymore. I mean, the really great example of this is, if you are old enough for this, and if you're not, I'll tell you the story of WordPerfect. So these days we all use Microsoft Word. The whole Office suite is just common. But back in the early days of computing, even though Microsoft had the operating system, WordPerfect was the dominant editing software. That's what everybody used. And at one point, WordPerfect released a version that was so buggy, I can tell you through analogy, it actually crashed not the computer, it crashed the phone lines with all the people trying to call in to get help support. So I think they were in Salt Lake City or something like that. So in Utah, all the phones went dead because so many people were trying to call for support on WordPerfect. Their software was that crappy. And now you might never even have heard of WordPerfect. That just shows you how bad it was. It went from dominant software to possibly being insignificant or gone because of a lack of proper error handling, I don't want to say it was validation itself, but again, bad software leads to bad things for your company, and a lot of that comes from without proper validation. Now, if you do add validation, which you will be asked to do for this class, you're going to spend more time coding. You're going to spend time having to anticipate what are the crazy things users could do. Like I told you to type in the number of items you want. Well, what if I type in FOUR instead of the number 4? Seems like a legitimate thing to type in, but you need to be explicit in what the user's typing in, and you have to give them explicit messages in what you're expecting. Your life fundamentally will be more difficult, but you get to keep your job. You get to keep coding. You get to be thought of as a great developer. And so, generally speaking, validation is a huge topic, and there's many different ways to validate stuff. When I am building websites, there's one way I can go off and validate stuff. If I have XML, I have another way I can go off and validate stuff. At some point in your coding career, you'll see regular expressions. Those may or may not fall into what you're going to do for your project here. We're going to do it by hand. We're going to do some very simple validations just to get the idea of logic for you. There's validation frameworks, there's validation tools, there's all sorts of ways to make this stuff happen. What I want you to see is not so much the tools for specific validating numbers or email addresses or phone numbers or something like that, but the logic that we need to add, because that's pretty common. I have to put it in places, I have to do if statements, I have to do loops, I have to do different things like that we're going to go off and try. We're not going to see it all here in this video. We're going to see it through some of the demonstration that's going to come up as well, but let me give you a little taste for it. So this is a little method just saying is some field valid. So you can see in this case, we're trying to see the validity, is it a number? And in order to check if it's a number, we can use right here in the middle double.parseDouble. And so this parse double is going to allow us to take some text that we get from the field and turn it into a number. And if that text is not a number, it will throw an exception. So we use basic Java exception handling. Catch an exception. If any exception is thrown, it must not have been a number, and then I return false. Otherwise, I return true. Now this isn't the end-all be-all, and often I'll be checking this directly inside of my code, but this is a useful example of a validation method. I can create a method that does nothing but validate a field. I can go and say, hey, did the user type in a valid dollar amount or something like that? But this is just the start of it, because a dollar amount, it depends. I mean, is negative dollars okay? Is $0 okay? Is less than $50 okay? There's all sorts of rules that have to go over the top of it. So there's no simple answer to validation outside of what does the application need. This checks if it's a number, doesn't necessarily check if it's a valid number. If I want to say what's your payment amount, I'm not going to pay you negative $10. I'm not going to accept $1 million as the payment because there's no banking network that will allow me to transfer $1 million all at once, perhaps. I don't know. Certainly a credit card is going to be unlikely. So we need to have context. We need to set these specifically. And we're going to get some demonstration, as I said, separately. You need to see this in action, so look for it. Look for it in videos, look for it in live chats. You will see ways of getting this validated, but you need to do validation in your application. Oh, get your stuff working first. Build your GUI. Get your buttons working and get something going on there. And once you have your happy case working, come back and consider validation. That's a key part of coding. It's something that you need to learn eventually, so try it out here in class where there's plenty of time to get some feel for it and get a chance to practice it with an instructor to help guide you.